Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible intelligence operations of the 20th century. This is the story of how Israeli agents hunted down and captured the architect of the Holocaust, Adolf Eichmann.
Okay, just imagine you're hearing this for the first time. The year is 1960. It's been 15 years since the end of World War II. And then, boom, this shocking announcement is made in the Israeli parliament. A top Nazi, a man responsible for murdering millions, a ghost who had literally vanished off the face of the earth, was in custody. This news didn't just make waves, it electrified the entire globe.
And that was the question on everybody's lips. How in the world did they pull this off? For a decade and a half, Eichmann was one of the most wanted men on the planet, and yet he was living a quiet, normal life. So to really understand how the Secret Service of a brand new nation managed this unbelievable feat, we first have to understand exactly who they were hunting.
To really get the sheer magnitude of this operation, you have to know who this man was. See, this wasn't just some other Nazi officer hiding out in South America. This was the logistical mastermind of the final solution, the man who made the Holocaust happen on an industrial scale.
6 million. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered during the Holocaust. It's a number so huge it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around it. And Adolf Eichmann? He was the engine behind that number. He was the one organizing the trains, the deportations, the timetables of death.
And what's just so bone-chilling is that he wasn't ashamed of any of it. He was proud. This quote, which was a boast he made in 1945 while the Nazi regime was collapsing around him, shows you a man with absolutely zero remorse. He didn't see the murder of millions as a crime. He saw it as a personal achievement.
So here's the really crucial point. Eichmann wasn't the one pulling a trigger. No, he was something arguably much more terrifying. A desk jockey of genocide. He sat at a desk with maps, train schedules, and population lists, and with a pen and a piece of paper, he orchestrated the systematic annihilation of an entire people. He was the master of the machinery of death.
So after the war, he just vanished. But the hunt for him never, ever stopped. Let's get into the incredible story of how he was finally found. And, it doesn't begin with some high-tech spy agency, but with a single, incredibly determined man.
And this right here just shows you how unbelievable the situation really was. The guy who cracked the case was Lothar Hermann, a German Jew who had survived the camps but was left blind. He was living in poverty in Argentina. And the man he was hunting? Well, he was living under the name Ricardo Clement, just a quiet family man with a factory job. The monster was literally hiding in plain sight.
The big break came from pure, dumb luck. In 1957, Hermann's daughter started dating a young man named Klaus, who foolishly bragged about his Nazi father. Hermann put the pieces together and sent a tip to Israel. Now, after a couple of false starts, the head of Mossad, Isser Harel, reopened the case. And by April 1960, they had photographic proof, a perfect match of the ear on Ricardo Clement to old photos of Eichmann. They had their man.
Okay, so finding him was one thing, but capturing him and getting him out of Argentina without anyone noticing, that was a whole different level of challenge. This is where the story goes from a detective case to a real-life spy thriller.
The Mossad team broke the whole operation down into 4 critical steps. First, they had to watch his every move, figure out his routine. Second was the capture itself, the snatch. Third, they had to hold him in a secret safe house to confirm his identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. And finally, the most daring part of all, smuggling him out of the country.
The moment of capture was incredibly tense, and it was over in seconds. Eichmann had the same routine every single day. As he stepped off that bus near his home on Garibaldi Street, the team made its move. They rustled him to the ground, muffled his screams, and threw him into a waiting car. After 15 years on the run, the architects of the Holocaust had finally been caught.
For the next 10 days, the world knew absolutely nothing. Eichmann was being held in a secret location, blindfolded, shackled to a bed. The agents, many of whom were Holocaust survivors themselves, had to feed and care for the very man who had murdered their families. And during this whole time, they interrogated him, getting him to confirm his identity, his SS number, and the monstrous details of his crimes.
Now this was the riskiest part of the entire mission. To get him out, they drugged him, dressed him up in an airline uniform, and just brazenly walked him right through airport security. He was bundled onto a special El Al flight, and it was only once they were in the air that the crew even learned who their secret passenger really was.
The capture was a massive success, but bringing Eichmann to Israel ignited this huge international firestorm, and it raised some really deep questions about the very nature of justice.
The capture immediately set off this fierce international debate. I mean, sure, a lot of people celebrated, but legal experts and entire governments, especially Argentina's, were furious. Did Israel just commit an illegal kidnapping? Did they violate another country's sovereignty? And how could a state that didn't even exist when the crimes happened possibly have the jurisdiction to hold a trial?
The arguments were pretty stark. Argentina took a formal complaint to the United Nations, saying its sovereignty was violated. But Israel's defense was, well, it was groundbreaking. They argued that Eichmann's crimes weren't against any one country, but against all of humanity, and that for a monster like him, the normal rules of sovereignty just don't apply.
At the very heart of Israel's legal case was this concept: universal jurisdiction. The best way to think about it is like the old laws against pirates on the high seas. A pirate was seen as an enemy of all nations, so any country that caught one could put them on trial. Israel argued that genocide was the modern equivalent, a crime so horrific that any nation had the right, maybe even the duty, to seek justice. This argument would end up being a cornerstone for future international human rights law.
But beyond that universal claim, the Israeli court made a much more personal one. It argued that the State of Israel was the living embodiment of the Jewish people, the very people Eichmann tried to wipe out. This powerful metaphor from the court really says it all. The attack on the roots and branches, the Jews of Europe, was a direct attack on the trunk, the entire Jewish people who are now represented by the State of Israel.
And in a final tragic twist, this pursuit of justice had a terrible cost for the man who made it all possible. After the news of the capture broke, Lothar Hermann, the blind survivor who started the whole hunt, was arrested by Argentinian authorities. Acting on bad information from Nazi sympathizers, they accused him of being another infamous war criminal, Josef Mengele. It took 2 agonizing weeks to finally clear the name of the true hero of this story.
This whole saga leaves us with a final, lingering question. The capture of Adolf Eichmann was an incredible triumph of persistence, but it was also packed with moral complexity, from breaking international law to the tragic ordeal of the very man who sought justice in the first place. It forces us to ask, when monsters are hiding right there in plain sight, what is the true price of holding them to account?